In the bitter cold of the northern wilderness, where the trees stand like frozen sentinels and the howl of the wind carries tales of dread, the legend of the Wendigo was born. Long before settlers arrived, the indigenous tribes of Canada and the northern United States whispered stories of a creature so terrifying it could curdle the blood and freeze the soul. Centuries ago, in a winter more merciless than any before, an Algonquin village lay trapped beneath an unforgiving sky. Snow fell relentlessly, smothering the land in an endless white shroud, sealing off hope as surely as it buried the earth. The rivers froze into unyielding glass, and the creatures of the forest vanished, as if the land itself had turned its back on the people. The days were fleeting ghosts, swallowed by nights that stretched on forever, filled with the mournful wail of the wind. The villagers huddled together, their breath rising in desperate frost-laden whispers. Their stores of dried meat and berries dwindled to dust. Mothers clutched their children against the cold, their lullabies brittle with fear. Elders, once the keepers of wisdom, told stories by the dying fire, but even their voices faltered, words fading like embers in the dark. Makwa, a hunter once revered, bore the weight of their suffering like a curse. He had been their provider, their protector, until now. No matter how far he roamed, no matter how carefully he tracked, the land remained barren, mocking him with its silence. Each returned to the village empty-handed, carved deeper wounds into his pride, his spirit unraveling with every failure. As the hunger deepened, so did the despair. The village, once bound by kinship, began to fracture. Eyes once filled with trust grew sharp with suspicion. In the cold, in the quiet, they whispered of things unspoken, of sins that could not be taken back. Then came the night when the northern lights set the sky ablaze, eerie ribbons of green and gold flickering like the breath of ancient spirits. Under their glow, Makwa made his choice. He stood before the village, his voice steady despite the dread clawing at his heart. "I will go deeper into the forest," he declared, "beyond where any hunter has dared tread. I will not return empty-handed." His wife clung to him, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Please," she begged, her fingers like iron around his arm, "do not go. We will find another way." But there was no other way. "If I do not return," Makwa murmured, "let my failure die with me." He turned and walked into the abyss of the forest, his figure swallowed by the towering trees. The villagers watched in silence, their breath frosting in the air, their hearts heavy with the weight of farewell. Days passed, the wind howled, and hope withered. They mourned him as lost, but Makwa was not lost. Deep in the heart of the endless, snow-choked forest, Makwa succumbed to hunger. The emptiness inside him gnawed like teeth, hollowing out his mind until only primal desperation remained. He stumbled through the ice-crusted trees, his breath a ragged whisper against the silence. His frost-bitten hands trembled, grasping at nothing, his vision swimming between reality and nightmare. Then, through the swirling snow, he saw it, a forgotten hunting camp, half buried in the drifts. Relief surged through him like fire. The spirits had not abandoned him, after all. But as he stepped inside, the truth clawed at his throat. The crude shelter was not empty. Frozen bodies lay scattered, their faces contorted in agony, their unseeing eyes wide with the horror of their final moments. Makwa recoiled, but hunger had become a living thing inside him, whispering, urging. His stomach twisted violently, his bones ached with need. He whispered a prayer for forgiveness, but it was drowned out by the wind screaming through the trees. The first bite was a surrender, the second a corruption. By the third, something ancient stirred. A shadow slithered through his veins, coiling around his soul, seeping into his marrow. The taste of human flesh carried more than just sustenance. It carried the curse. His body convulsed as something unseen took root inside him. His limbs stretched with sickening pops, his fingers blackened and split into talons. His spine arched as his ribs protruded against his skin. His eyes, once warm and kind, now burned with an unnatural predatory gleam. His mouth split wider, teeth elongating into jagged points made for rending flesh. Makwa was no longer a man. He was hunger incarnate. When he returned to the village, the firelight flickered against his grotesque form. The air turned heavy, thick with a scent that made the villagers' stomachs churn. Gasps of horror filled the night as he stepped forward. His wife's eyes widened in disbelief. "Makwa," she choked, her voice breaking. A village elder yanked her back, his voice sharp with terror. "That is not Makwa. Run." But it was too late. The wind howled through the village as the thing that had once been a man smiled, revealing teeth meant for tearing, and took its first step forward. Makwa was no more. What returned to the village was something else entirely. Something twisted, cursed, and ravenous. His people whispered in terror, saying the evil spirits had claimed him, that his soul had been devoured by the hunger. His body had stretched into something monstrous, his bones cracking and reshaping with every unnatural movement. His limbs were too long, his fingers ending in blackened talons that twitched with insatiable need. His skin clung to his frame like a rotting hide, pulled taut over protruding ribs and gaping joints. Then came the antlers, jagged, gnarled things that erupted from his skull, dripping with blood as if they had been torn from the flesh of something else. His face was no longer human, his mouth stretched wide, his lips peeled back to reveal jagged, predatory teeth meant for rending meat. His eyes, once filled with warmth, were now twin abysses, hollow pits that swallowed all light. The village cowered as he emerged from the trees, his breath a ragged, inhuman rasp that echoed through the frozen night. The air thickened with decay, and a deep, unnatural chill settled over the land. Animals fled, the firelight sputtered, and the villagers knew this was not Makwa. This was something far older, far hungrier. He did not walk, he stalked, his movements jagged and predatory. His hunger was endless, an abyss that could never be filled. And when the first scream tore through the night, the elders whispered his new name with trembling lips. The evil spirit, Wendigo. And the wind howled in agreement.